Welcome, everybody, as we go into week 3, where we're going to focus on training and compensation. Before we get going, I wanted to give a couple observations from week 1 and 2. So first and foremost, thank you, everybody, for your work and just your insurance of making sure that you get all your things in. And I love the discussion and the back and forth that everyone has had. As a reminder, there are no right or wrong answers on any of the discussions. The whole point is we're not together. This group has quite a bit of HR experience, and as much as we can learn things in the classroom, the reality is what gets put into practice is very, very much different a lot of the times, depending on the culture, size, location, lots of different factors of the businesses that we are in. So as you continue to work through the next 4 weeks of the class, I think what's important to remind you of what my goal is a bit of repetition. I want you to be able to know your internal and your external metrics and to be able to write them, right? You're not going to, unless you're working for a top company to work for, be able to do all metrics, all things, all 5 attributes every single time. That would probably be a little exhausting for everybody. But I do want you to be able to reasonably put them together, and I want you to practically be able to put them together so that you know when you're writing a metric, what's your goal behind that metric? Is it just an internal tracking? Are you trying to change behavior? Are you trying to ask for something? Are you trying to implement something? Are you trying to prove something? So because that's why we use metrics, we don't use them just for being numbers. We use them to get something out of it, right? Either to prove that we're doing a great job, or to be able to have the data behind why we're asking for money, or prove or change behavior of something that we think is either going awry or going great. So just remember that when you're going through this week. And something that I am going to switch up, I know that Chapter 3 was training and Chapter 4 was compensation, but we're going to actually start with Chapter 4. So when you flip to the next slide, we will focus on compensation first. All right, so let's dive in on compensation. And I'm going to talk a little bit more broadly about compensation and rewards for the next couple slides, because in my opinion, it's the chicken and the egg. You can't have good recruiting processes or outcomes unless you have good reward systems, and you can't have good reward systems unless you're hiring good people so that your company can make money, right? They're symbiotic, these two things. Rewards and compensation. So in my organization, I oversee total rewards. So what that means is compensation, benefits, recognition, both monetary and non-monetary items. These are the things that really kind of bring together that employee value proposition. Why do people want to work here? Beyond the passion or the mission of the organization, or what they do, these are the things that, bottom line, across every working generation, if you're a centennial to a traditionalist, because all of them are in the working force right now, are in the top 5 most important things: pay, bonus, vacation, time off, any other kinds of time off, holiday, retirement, right? All those rewards. Those might differ on where they fall on the top 5, but they are the top 5 most important. It's the most important thing within the top 5 of any of those generations. So it's not something we can't not talk about, right? We have to talk about how we pay and how we reward, because unmotivated employees cost us oodles of dollars, and the motivated ones make you rich. And that's the key of understanding, is when you have poor pay practices, you're going to have poor productivity. You're going to have poor retention. You're going to have a harder time hiring, and you're going to have a more difficult time to market. So poor pay practices will impact those things. Maybe not right out the gate. Sometimes it's hard to measure. In my organization, there's a piece of our organization that it's harder for me to measure paying under market having an impact because it's a high turnover, right? The retail space can have a high turnover. So you have to decide, again, that peanut butter spread, right, is maybe it's okay to have a lower pay practice there, and then you have to have a higher pay practice in, let's say, like our digital marketing and agency, right? We're not going to get anyone competent and great if we're not paying at or above benchmark. So you have to be able to quantify some of these things to your CFO. Great leaders know this, right? Great leaders are going to say, yep, I get it. And great HR folks are going to say, maybe we don't have the money to spread it across everybody, but let's figure out who and what is driving the biggest part of our business so that we can make a different approach within our rewards, based on those items. Poor pay practices will cause unmotivated employees. So the ones who are getting paid low, that take the job and stay a long, long time, chances are, not always, but chances are, probably aren't your cream of the crop, right? But they unmotivate the ones that are your superstars. So your superstars are like, why am I working this hard when, Jim over here is like working half as hard and I'm making the same amount of money as him? Or we're all not making as much as, competitor A, B, and C, and I could go over and do it there better. So many times you become a company where people learn from, they learn the tricks of the trade, and then they leave you to go implement those tricks of the trade that they learned from you at your competition, which that's not great. You don't get the innovation and new ideas that you would if you were a market payer or a market reward. Maybe it's not just the base pay. Maybe that's what's under, but or at benchmark. But it could be all the other things, right? It could be the dogs at work, or feeding them lunch, or amazing vacation, whatever it is, but that package entices people to stay and to come, which then gives you people who have great ideas, they're innovative, they're going to look at trying to get things out to market, especially if you have a compensation program that has a bonus program that's very transparent so that everyone understands, as the company makes money, I'm going to make money. So, the organizations I've worked for, you really want to be transparent. What's the gate, right? We've got to make X amount of money for anyone to even be considered. So until we make that, no one's going to be considered. That's like the rules of business. But the minute we make above that gate, that's when we're all going to make a lot of money. And for every, X percent the company makes, this is how we're going to divide it up to people. So that's why having goals and objectives, short-term and long-term incentive programs that are truly performance-based, not just off the person, but off of the business, gets more stake in the game for everybody. You're also going to give a poor customer experience if you have poor pay practices, because people are just going to be irritable, right? And they're not going to care. And because they don't care and they don't have the motivation that they should have, that's going to reflect in how people are treated. So what you need to ask yourself are people leaving due to pay? Do you know this, right? My company, we do exit interviews, not off everyone, but we do them off, we have 100,000 employees. We don't do them off everybody, but we definitely do them off a certain key level position. And we do ask about pay. Was that one of the reasons for leaving? Are you hiring mediocre people because you pay low? So are you getting the top talent? Or do you have to hire people who are underexperienced because you can't pay for experienced people? And then what is that doing to the rest of your team or your organization? These are all really important things to think about, because the compensation rewards program that you have impacts all of these things. Compensation, in my mind, and rewards are one of the easiest items to measure. Success and failure, or cost to the business. Where it gets more difficult is the longer term ROI. So many times it's harder to prove that the rewards or the decisions you're making around these rewards are going to have long-term impact. So, when I first started my career, I worked for CFOs who just knew this, right? They knew that if you treated people well, that you would make a lot of money. and that if you held people accountable and they had a great reason to work here, the business was going to make a lot of money. I've also worked for CFOs who don't believe this, that don't believe that turnover has an impact, that don't understand why you have to pay a benchmark because the company's still making money. And it's harder to prove that, there's this gap that we could be making more money, because when you're in a quarter-to-quarter environment, either publicly traded or privately held, it becomes a lot more daunting to have to prove it. So you have to figure out for your organization, what are you going to bite off? And then when you bite that off, focus on that one thing, because it's really easy to say, I'm going to focus on merit, I'm going to focus on bonus, I'm going to focus on benefit increases, and I'm going to focus on time off, and I'm going to focus on, paying for lunches and whatever else it is, but all that stuff costs money. So you really have to figure out, what are you going to get the biggest bang for your buck at? All right, let's go on to our next slide. So let's really talk about what rewards are, and what a great rewards practice and package looks like. So let's start with base and bonus compensation. So your base and bonus is pretty plain, cut and dry, plain and simple. Your base compensation is what you make every paycheck, annually. Your bonus could be what's called short-term incentives, STIs, or long-term incentives, LTIs. In some companies, this could be profit sharing as well, could be in here. In other companies, an ESOP could be in here. So it's kind of a component of a base and a bonus. So on a base compensation, you will find practices where companies pay at like the 50th percentile of the market. That means that 50% of the companies pay less and 50% of the companies pay more, but you're right smack in the middle. So this could be an ideal state to be in, but it doesn't mean you have to be in this state. There are companies who pay at the 90th percentile base, right? So that means only 10% of companies pay more than them, and they pay more than 90% of other companies. So there's a pro and a con to that, right? The pro to that is you are going to get some really cool talent because you pay at that level. The con to that is, depending, you might not have a bonus structure that really continues to foster that you need to be a top payer, and we're going to reward you for the more and more you give. Now, that doesn't always need to be the case, right? You could have like a Netflix culture or an Amazon or a Microsoft culture where if you don't make your numbers and you're not doing what you're supposed to do, there's very little write-ups. It's not like 1 corrective action, 2 corrective actions, 3 corrective actions, you're fired. It's like you either do it or you don't have a job. So if you're going to have that type of environment, you can pay really high because you've got a type A, overachieving set of workforce there. So your base compensation, as the author talks about throughout the whole book, is benchmarked. You need to benchmark it. You need to know where you are. Every HR professional needs to know where you're benchmarked for compensation, and your leaders need to know that too. The more transparent your organization is, as you have a downstream effect of pushing out to the associates, they're going to kind of know where they are too. This isn't the class to get into wage bands and wage grades and where people fall in it, but what you need to know is, where are you to benchmark, and is it impacting retention, and is it impacting hiring? And then from a bonus perspective, it's very important as well, because if your bonuses are not creating a program to increase productivity, then there's this disconnect, right? Because the whole point of compensation and a bonus is to reward for that performance. So, some organizations for bonus, there's a lot of stock on the individual, right? How the individual does, and they get, 60% of their bonus target is tied to them, and 40% is tied to the business. So you really need to think tried and true on this, right? My philosophy is, the higher up you are in the organization, the more your bonus, if not all, should be tied to how the business does. The lower you are in the organization, kind of on the food chain, probably flip that, right? Because you might have a little less impact on the whole company as it comes together, but you definitely have impact on yourself. This is not always true, mostly in team environments. So if you've got a sales team environment, you definitely want to create that competition of the salespeople, but you also want to have the competition of the sales team, right? The team delivering, not just the person delivering. Because if the person delivers and creates bad behaviors that it hurts the rest of their team, that hurts the company. So your bonus and base compensation programs, they need to be benchmarked. You need, if you have a bonus program, people need to understand what it is and how they get it. It's okay to have a discretionary bonus program, but if you're going to have one, people need to understand what is it that I need to do to get it. So if it's the discretionary bonus program is if the company makes its year-end targets, are you letting associates know quarter by quarter, month by month, where we are in meeting those targets and what they can do to meet those targets? Because if not, you need to rethink that. So the metrics that you could give is you could say, companies that have bonuses tied to profitability, even if they're discretionary, do these things, and their business 7 out of 10 times, 8 out of 10 times, 9 out of 10 times makes their numbers, right? You can pull that information. Or you could say, we took a cohort group and we noticed that when we tell them how we're doing, bad or good, that every time we communicate that, we've communicated 8 times, profitability goes up the next month, and we hit target. So you're going to want to look at those things. When you initially do them, if you don't have data internally, that's where you're going to want to use benchmark data, and you're going to want to compare to what your competition is doing. So the next rewards is benefits. So that's like your medical, dental, vision, 401k, right? So these things are really important. And this really comes around like what's your rewards philosophy? What kind of company do you want to be? Do you want to be a company that people come to because you have all these awesome rewards? Or do you want to be a company where it's like, it's like it is what it is, right? Nobody doesn't come because of them and nobody does come because of them. So in my organization, we're not out there to be the best of the best in these. What we're out there to be, like our employee value proposition is that we're this huge company that still works very small in the sense of there's a lot of entrepreneurial, you're going to learn on the spot, you're going to have great exposure, you're going to build, it's constantly changing. That's our employee value proposition. So all these 4 things are either here nor there, right? They're going to be a round benchmark with our competition. It's not going to be what creates your to come or not. For our agencies, what we're learning as our business is growing is that you kind of have to have all of that, because the agencies not only are smaller ones are offering that same vibe of the experience and the working with some great leaders in the industry and that entrepreneurial spirit, but they also have like unbelievable packages of cool things. So, we've had to be very mindful of looking, and I have had to be very mindful of looking at benchmark data. What is the competition doing? Once I can tell you what the competition's doing, that's when I go and say, hey, we need to cover X more part of the benefits, and this is how much it's going to cost. Or from a benefits perspective, if I want to put in a program that's going to target our high cost claims for healthcare, I'm very honest. We're not going to see a quarter by quarter decrease in claims. It's going to take 1, 3, 5 years, whatever that is. And then I show it and I prove it to them. And I show them other companies who have done this and what it's done for them. And I don't ask for everything. I ask for the things that are going to give the biggest bang for the buck. Also, what I do for rewards that I want all of you to think about is when I save money or avoid spending money, I ask if I can have that money back to reinvest it into the next thing. So once they give me one nugget and I can save, or I can show profitability, or I can show that we've been able to decrease problems with our hiring, or we've been able to retain people longer, and I put a dollar amount to that, I'll ask for some of that money. I'll say, these programs that we just did allowed us to reduce our turnover by 5%, which shows that's $1 million, savings to the business or added back to the business. Can I have 500,000 of that? And now I want to invest that in our 401k program because I noticed 401k is the most important thing for blah, blah, blah. So that's what you need to think about. I never go in asking for, the whole universe. I have a very strategic plan, and sometimes I will divulge that plan, say here's what I want to do as we're going. Other times, maybe I just focus on the one thing. So the third thing is non-cash. So these are things like vacation, PTO, holiday sick, dogs at work, food at work. I mean, you can go on and on and on. My organization just launched trendy dress code. So you can wear jeans every day. You just have to be trendy dress, right? Like you can't dress like a crazy, unprofessional person, but at the same time you don't have to come in a suit and tie. We also have Flex Fridays during the summer. So summer Flex Fridays, as long as your work's done, you can just leave early and you get paid. Now, of course, if you're hourly in California, there's rules around that. But so those are some of the non-cash things. We also have, vacation, holidays, sick time. Some of our groups don't have those three things. It's just a PTO. Again, we don't peanut butter spread here. We do what is benchmarked in the business. So you're going to hear that over and over. So these things, you definitely want to put metrics around too. Like, where are we benchmarked to time off? Benchmark is a metric because you're going to tell a story with it. You're either above or below. Maybe you're overpaying on time off that you can say, gosh, we're going to cut that down and I'm going to take some of that money. Remember the shifting of the resources? I'm going to put it into health and welfare. So you really can show your value if you can say, here's where we're benchmarked for everything. Now, if you're below benchmark on everything, you're not going to go out and ask for everything. You're going to say, here's what we need because this is the biggest bang for the buck. All right, last one is recognition. So recognition is humongous. Recognition, without a doubt, in any of the workforces that is in the business right now, is within the top 5 things that are important. How they like to be recognized are a little bit different, right? So millennials and centennials particularly like public recognition, on-the-spot recognition, daily, weekly recognition. A lot of our traditionalists do not like public recognition. They like more personal recognition, recognition that could have a small incentive with it, gift cards, so forth. Gen Xers have, depending on where they are within Gen X, they like a mix of those things. And baby boomers really like recognition around being able to be recognized in the ability to mentor and their establishment within whatever their field is. So none of that has to cost money. Things like celebrating anniversaries, celebrating birthdays, celebrating big wins, and calling that out within the organization motivates everybody in some way, but it truly motivates the team or the person or the people who receive that recognition. So in my team, what we do is we have what's called a shout out. So when someone, between the benefits, compensation, retirement, global mobility, comp, whatever, right? I have little pockets of teams. There's like 26 altogether people between all the different teams. When they catch each other or get an attaboy from an associate or a manager or a leader or a VP, they send it out to the whole group. And it's like the most important thing for everybody because it keeps everyone motivated and it keeps the vibe on the team as a team who genuinely cares about each other and genuinely wants to recognize each other. So when I was young, I worked at Target, and Target had what was called Great Team Cards, and you got to recognize people, and it was great. Then Target changed it where you had to give out so many Great Team Cards, and the entire importance of the Great Team Card program kind of went down the drain because what it ended up showing was that people just willy-nilly put up Great Team Cards. So it had this unintended consequence, and I know people that are at Target still, and they've changed it again to where it's this peer-to-peer recognition program, and it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And how they know is they measure it. They ask people, how does this make you feel? That's how I know with my team, how does it make you feel? But more importantly, when a shout out goes out on my team, I have been able to measure how quickly emails, voicemails get responded to. They respond to emails and voicemails at double the pace within 2 hours after a shout out. Now, I know that's not realistic of it being all the time, but everyone's more motivated. So the biggest thing to remember when you're building your programs, you need to have a differential between the people who are the best and the people who are average and the people who are just not performing. People who are not performing shouldn't be getting merits, shouldn't be getting bonuses, right? Quite honestly, they shouldn't. The author says a 25% differential, which is something I would agree with. You need to make sure you can demonstrate measurable impact of the business, right? When you do these things, that there's going to be a measurable impact of the business. So, for example, when you give a merit, if you're giving a 3% merit, you better ensure that the company is at least having 3% profit. If you're giving out $1 million in bonuses, you better believe that the business better made at least $2 million in profit, right? So you need to be able to measure that. You need to be able to measure that what you're doing and what you're rewarding is aligned with the business. So you could go and say, listen, we're making $20 million and we're only rewarding people, a 20th% of that, 1/20th of a percent. Like, we should do more because what statistics show is that they'll generate more or whatever. Utilize the latest technology. So I sent those links on Workday and ADP and Ultimate Software, and a lot of you have been sending me links of different technologies. YouTube, go on YouTube. There's so many of them. If you YouTube compensation systems, it's like, for someone like me, it's my Disneyland. It is amazing. I mean, they will tell you like pretty little graphs, splatter charts that show people who are above the range, below the range, people in jobs that are where they sit in pay. If you can invest in technology to help you, you will be so much more effective. Now, you also have to make a business case to do that. So that's where I would use the technology platforms to help you make that business case. The reduction in work you're going to have to do, how quick you can turn around reports, how you can do merit faster, how you can do bonus faster, how you can be more effective and efficient from that merit pool or that bonus pool. Oh, guys, just Google, go on YouTube. You'll see a ton of them. I think I've posted some of them too within our different weeks. You need to have top management buy-in and employee buy-in. People need to understand what your rewards philosophy is. And, I'm very passionate about this because transparency is going to be the life of a business or the death of a business within the next 5 years. Millennials expect transparency. They live in a generation where they have never not known anything, right? The newer millennials and centennials, other than Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, you name it, right? I have a 6-year-old that can Instagram like my 21-year-old sister. I'll look at my Instagram account and all of a sudden people are commenting because she's like made these little doggy faces, right? And she'll ask me, Mom, did someone respond? Like, she expects immediate. It's right or wrong, you guys. It's life, And like I said, we can YouTube. We can do all these things. Our business needs to be transparent. When you're in a bad business slump and people know, they're going to work harder to do the right thing because they have faith in the business and the company. My grandparents told me, we worked at the same company forever and ever, and they cared about us and we cared about them. And, I'll be quite frank, I've never really thought the companies I've worked for care about me personally, like the company. Maybe my boss, yes, or my boss's boss, but the company, no, they could care less about me. What's interesting is you're starting to see an evolution of that come back, the pendulum swing. The centennials are demanding a different way to work, and the younger millennials are, and they want the companies that they work for to care about them and value what they value, right? So you're seeing these organizations who are taking a stance, regardless of what you believe in, on politics and all things that are taboo to talk about. And that's why people really believe in this industry and some of the leaders and the industrial psychologists that you've got to have buy-in, because there is now a new shift of an old shift that you probably will see centennials staying in a job longer because they're going to expect the job to care about them as much as they care about it. So the transparency is just going to be a requirement. That's the part that's different. I think traditionalists, 70, 80, and 90-year-olds who worked, they just assume the business is doing the right thing. Centennials won't assume the business is doing the right thing. They're going to demand to see it. And the last thing is having measurable goals. You need to have a lot of them. So in my team, as I said, we have all different facets of the teams I oversee. So we have one large team goal that we're all working towards, so that we have a vested interest in We have a reason to care if our folks over in comp or systems are doing what they're supposed to do, or retirement and benefits are doing what they're supposed to do, or leave and accommodations are doing what they're supposed to do, or relocation or global mobility are doing what they're supposed to do, or immigration is doing what they're supposed to do. I might not work in immigration, right? But I care what immigration is doing because it's part of my team goal. So that's how I have my team structured. And then I have a company goal for everybody, and then I have department and individual. So they have four. And then me, myself, for transparency to you guys, mine is all based off the company. Either we make the money and I get a bonus, or we don't. So that motivates me to motivate my team, because my team's goals are based on what the company needs. So we spend a lot of money, right? I am an operating center that spends lots and lots and lots of money, right? 100,000 people, and I've got all the things that are rewards that cost money. So I need to make sure that whatever we're doing is helping recruiting, because if they can't keep people and they're having a hard time hiring people, I have a direct impact in that, and I know that. So I know what their goals are, because their goals are things that I can help and I can help drive. That's how you create a matrix web of everyone feeling accountable to each other. So with that, now let's talk about, on our next slide, let's talk about some of those metrics and what you can measure and how to measure them. Okay, so compensation metrics. I really want to focus a couple minutes on internal and external metrics. So the author has his kind of definition when it comes to training on internal and external metrics. Internal meaning more things that are going to impact the internal business, and then the external on external clients and profitability. So those are correct. But if you do Google or go on your own to look at quality metrics, you're going to find a lot of internal and external metrics that have a different definition. And it's the definition I honestly use the most, and I use with my team as I teach them about metrics and analytics. So internal metrics to me are my internal team metrics. So sometimes these are things that I measure to see that my team is being accountable to itself or being accountable to our job. So from a benefits perspective, I measure things like how many people are enrolled in medical, what percent are not taking versus what percent are taking. For leave of absence, how many people are on leave of absence, and where geographically do we have more leaves than others. Accommodations, same thing, like what type of accommodations, how many people are in accommodations, how quickly are we closing cases, how long are they opened. For compensation, how many transactions are we doing? We do 20,000 plus transactions a week. So how many transactions are we doing? How fast is it taking us to do them? Who has the most errors within the team, and so forth. All those things are important because the business also likes to know those things. I don't have as much of a story on those because I'm not always trying to, change behavior or get money or prove something. But I publish some of those numbers out to the business. So because what I am proving, honestly, is that we do work, right? Like we have 20,000 transactions and I have 5 people, right? We've got 2,000 to 3,000 phone calls that we've answered same day, and we have 2,000 to 3,000 emails that we've answered same day over the course of the month, and we have 5 people. So it's not like my 5 people are just sitting on their hands, right? I'm proving why you're paying for us. So I'm not trying to change behavior. I'm not asking for more people, but I do use those metrics, and then I start to benchmark. So I can say if we're above or below, or I think that we've got something coming or brewing, because in the agency space for us, around with the retail space for us, when Target and Walmart and Costco start doing things and publishing things like maternity leave programs or adoption programs or time off programs, and they're not aligned with us, all of our associates are in those businesses. So that's going to be a problem. So I try to get ahead of that to say, hey, I already have a little arsenal of what would it cost us to do more, to do less, to lift and shift, all those things, so that when and if any of those clients of ours start making changes, I have the ability to react to it for our business quicker, which is, quite frankly, how I built business credibility, because I'm ready and I have just internal metrics. So for compensation, these actually are my internal metrics, and if you were to Google, and in our team, Linda, thank you, she sent me great internal and external quality metrics that she found off of a Canadian SHRM-like organization. And They were on there too. So number of promotions and demotions. So I have that in compensation because if we are promoting people, it's changing their pay. And if we're demoting people, typically it's changing their pay. And I like to see internally how many people we're promoting and externally how many people we're hiring in roles that we could have promoted. And I look, how much did we pay our internal promotion versus how much do we have to pay someone external? And what is that differential? And when we hire internally for a promotion, do we get more out of if we hire externally? Never do you want all one or the other. You definitely want both. But in my organization, we actually do have a metric that is we want 75% of our promotions to be internal and 25% to be external. So that keeps us fresh and new, but at the same time, that keeps us from having high turnover. So like within my team, I have very little turnover because I live by this practice. And as I've told you guys, I've lots of millennials and centennials who work for me. So it gives them the ability to see the trajectory and they're constantly learning. So that kind of goes into that percent of internal versus external and what is that cost. So that's something that we do. We measure that internally. We do give that to the business. They don't do a lot with it, to be quite frank. If I started seeing a problem where I had to prove why we should be doing what we're doing, or if I started seeing that our internal promotions weren't giving us what we need and we needed to maybe shift that, I would use that. Benchmarking. You can never benchmark enough in the rewards space, ever. This is the space where benchmarking will make or break your career. And then future needs and costs. So from an internal perspective, I look at things like, okay, did minimum wage. When is minimum wage changing for what municipalities and how much is that going to cost? And I do all that analysis and metrics so I'm ready to give it to the business ahead of time. So the business knows, like, you're going to have to pay more in unemployment or wage an hour or the Department of rules with FLSA, the exempt and non-exempt. So by staying ahead of it and letting my business know so that they can manage their budgets and we can all talk about where is this impacting or not. Or you do the Target effect, right? Target just came out and said we're hiring everyone between $12 and $15 an hour. I mean, great for them, right? They don't have to deal with any of the minimum wage, just above it for everybody. But that has a business fiscal impact. I guarantee you someone at Target in their comp department and in their recruiting department said, by us doing this, we're getting a better caliber cashier. We're not having as much turnover, which means we don't have less training, which probably means we have less theft, which means blah, 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 right? And they were able to benchmark that. So other internal metrics that you can do from a comp and benefits perspective, I had said earlier, those things like how many people are enrolled versus not enrolled versus benchmark. What is the percent of your merit increases versus benchmark? What is the amount of money that you are spending in goals, the goal payouts for bonuses? Where are you for 401k match versus benchmark? All of those things are important to have internally. Transaction numbers. I like to know my team's transaction numbers because if and when I was to be ever to need to have more people or someone wanted me to cut my heads, I could prove, the level of work that we're doing. So then the big one, right, is the business external. So I want to make sure all of you know you're not going to do this every single day all the time, but you do need to do these, right, these 5 attributes. So people and profit. So these are things like, how much do you pay in compensation per dollar versus your profit? What's that percentage look like? So if you're paying $40 million in comp every year, right, base pay or bonus or whatever, what percent of your revenue is that? And what should it be? What do other companies have? What are your impacts of pay increases? So if you do a 3% pay increase, how much does that result in an increase in productivity? And if it doesn't, what are your competition doing? And what's the trend over year over year? Those are important things when you look at pay increases. The other things you want to look at is like highly paid associates. So when you benchmark and you say, okay, our highly paid associates are under benchmark or over benchmark, correlate that to how much money or revenue that they give to the business, because that's important, right? And the business will want to know that, mostly if you're trying to build a case that you need to pay more, or maybe you need to pay less, or maybe that you need to relook at your bonus program or pay structure. These are the data points that you want to have for those types of things. The next is force ranking and pay for performance. So this is saying, all right, if I lined up every single person from the top performer to the lowest performer, how much are we paying them? What is the differential in their pay? That's important because that's going to help you when you go into performance management to see, do you have managers that give everybody fives, right? And then you have managers who give everybody ones. So we find this in my organization. You know, you have the one manager that everybody gets a 5. You're like, holy cow, everyone's that awesome, 1 to 5 scale, right? And then you have others who bell curve it. You have others that are just hard nosed. Everyone gets a 3. And then you realize that maybe that guy or girl giving everybody a 5 has the one department who, like, you know, doesn't do anything. It's really, really important in compensation, if you run it, that you also manage the merit process and the bonus process, and you calibrate, and you're able to say, you know, look at the data, you guys. Susie gives everyone 5s. Jim, you give everyone 3s. Susie, why are your people better than Jim's people? I calibrate my managers in a room together. It's a little dog eat dog, right? But after 3 years, they all know we're going to do it. So it has changed that behavior so that we're really looking. Is that 5 person really giving 5 to the organization? And then the impact of bonus payouts. So you really want to make sure that if you're paying out bonuses, that they literally are being paid out because the business is making money. You don't want to be paying out bonuses if the business isn't making money. Now, there is a caveat to that. There are times where you might be investing, right? You're in an investment state of R&D and so forth, so that the profitability that you want isn't going to be there, but it was a known profitability. So then, understood. Or maybe you have some really stellar call-out associates. But to do a blanket across bonus payout when you aren't making money, you really want to think through that and think through what message is that sending. So the last thoughts I want to have is on page 121 of the book. So he talks a lot about making sure your compensation programs match and increase productivity, and that we do a lot of things where there's the disconnect. So he talks about the goal of rewarding for performance, but for health benefits are the same for all with no change in pay based on performance. So I personally don't agree with that. I think that there's really good health and benefit programs with the more you make, the more you pay. The less you make, the less you pay. That's a more probably liberal approach to benefits. I don't know, but there are legal things you need to be careful if you do decide to do that. Rewards vary with position impact. So this is where you know, the VP makes more than the janitor, and I do agree with that. You know, everybody's position impact needs to be rewarded. You know, if that janitor wasn't there keeping the business clean, you know, would you shop in at Target? So those types of things to think about. I'm only picking on Target because I went to Target earlier today and it's my favorite store, so FYI. Anyway, so if you look at page 21, you will see that, you know, there are a lot of things he talks about the goal and then the disconnect. And majority of them I definitely agree with. The one that I think is interesting, because it's a topic of conversation a lot in another compensation class I taught at Cal State Fullerton, was the penalty for increasing expenses. So having more children and having a spouse increases your medical costs, and single people get less no matter what. And is that really fair, right? Because maybe that person with kids produces more and does more. So that's one that we have a lot of debate with, and when I teach compensation rewards program over at that other school. And then prove that benefit programs work. So we pay for education expenses, but we do not reward people when they compete or complete a program. And we have no data to show that performance increases as a result of completing education. So I'm going to tell you something. I literally just did a study on paying for education, tuition reimbursement, and loans, reimbursing student loans. It's the new thing in the market, in the industry, and mostly in digital technology, you know, agency type. I can't find any data that says they stay longer. In fact, if they're under 25, they don't stay longer unless you put a golden handcuff, and even then they'll just pay it. I also can't find any data that shows they'll give you more than they did before. But what I can show you is that it will get you a better caliber hire because of the perks. So this will be interesting. The wants and the needs of the new generations and how they intertwine will be very, very interesting as we, look at our recruiting and our retention, mechanisms and philosophies as we move forward. All right, so next let's talk about training. All right, so now let's talk about training. I think training is the most interesting of all the items in the HR life cycle, and it is for a few reasons. First, in many organizations, more than half actually, statistics show, training doesn't sit in HR. Training sits in operations. And in those organizations, HR training are the ones that managers see as those necessary evils, right? Those non-value adds, the trainings that are, required by the government or required by a statute, or, the cultural trainings, the ones that are seen by individuals and managers is how quickly can I click through this training without it knowing that I haven't read anything or that I'm working, like the DMV who used to be able to do online trainings and just click, 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 and now they time you. So I've seen it all, right? I mean, my organization, I oversee compliance trainings for a lot of areas, and I have seen it where they bring in their own laptop and they just work, and when it's ready to click to the next screen because it's timed, they click to the next screen on their personal laptop because we implemented a training technology that doesn't let you multitask on your own computer. So I get it, right? There's that. Then you have, the 45% of organizations that training sits within HR. And in more than half of those, training isn't measured. So proving that training demonstrates a business impact hasn't been a priority, although it needs to be, because 9 out of 10 times when budgets are tight, training is what gets cut. So let's talk about what managers say about training and why it's important to change the behavior. So training has the ability to do our 5 attributes of metrics because you want to change behavior, right? You want to change behavior because whatever you're training, you want people to embrace, to change a behavior or to adopt a behavior or to adopt a process that they can implement to make money for the business or to keep the business from losing money, being sued or any of those things. Many times you need to prove your worth so that you can do more trainings, right? And you want to create more trainings and develop more trainings and train more trainings and train the trainer trainings, but you need money. So you need to secure those funds, and usually the training budget's really tight, right? So you're definitely going to need metrics for that. You also have the need for managers to want your training, to want you to create training, right? That's when you've hit the cream of the cry of the best HR ever, is when managers come to you and say, hey, we are biting at the bit for you to train XYZ. So no assessment function. This is where managers feel that the trainings don't have value because we don't assess them. So if we don't say, okay, we did this training, and this is what the reward was, or the measurement was, or the assessment of this training was for doing it, and being able to tell the managers that. And some of this is as simple as we've conducted these many trainings, and these are what the employee said. I mean, while it's not perfect, that metric isn't, there's some room to grow. It really is an important aspect of why you don't want managers to say your trainings aren't very good, but if you can assess them and say they are, that helps. No value add, right? We just talked about this. No value add. Ugh, I do sexual harassment training again. I mean, how many of us have done those online sexual harassment trainings? I do them all the time. I feel like I do them like 5 times a year. And there is this heavy balance, right? In big, large organizations, it's very hard to bring everyone together. And quite frankly, as the generations in the workforce are changing, bringing everyone together to do a big training is becoming obsolete, right? Most people do what we're doing, online. We've never even really talked or met, yet you're being trained, right? So we have to make sure when we're doing trainings, we explain to the values and the purposes. So it could be, 5 years ago, we had 10 sexual harassment claims managers. It cost us $10 million. And over the course of the last 3 years, after we've implemented this, we've reduced it by, right? So get that it's a pain and you don't want to have to take those 3 hours or whatever the rule is in whatever state or municipality you're in, but it's working. Or is it working? Maybe it's not. And you're still getting trends of sexual harassment or workers' comp or ADA or whatever it is. So as I told you guys, I oversee ADA and we do lots of ADA trainings, and I have everything from 30-minute to 1 minute like YouTube video shorts to long required, 1 hour trainings, and I measure where are we on lawsuits year over year, and I open it up on every PowerPoint that I do, regardless if it's live or if it's recorded, and I make sure I have my stakeholders, those SVPs and those VPs, understanding why we're doing it, why it's so important. The next is the cause and effect, right? Managers are like, there's no cause and effect. You did this training, but it didn't do anything. So when I used to work for a large company and did a little bit of training as an HR business partner, we did a lot of Lominger, and Lominger does card sorts of what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, and what do you overuse and what do you underuse, and where are you from many different competencies. After we did those trainings, we would give people the tools and resources to go out and to work on certain things or to continue to foster their really great attributes. And then we didn't do anything after that. So the managers who didn't understand or value Lominger didn't want it. The ones who just understood it innately because either it helped them or they're more progressive, wanted it. So when I moved on to another organization and we were going to implement Lominger, we had a different follow-through. And the follow-through was, hey, manager, here are the attributes that we saw with Amber that are amazing. And here are the attributes with Amber that we thought, these are either overused or things that she needs to work on. Here are the 3 things we gave her to do. In 3 months, she's going to report back to us if she thinks she did them. And I'm going to have you report back to her along with 3 peers. And then I would. And it was interesting as we saw people who were just committed to this, like reformation of themselves and this buy-in of personal development, and then what it was doing with them and their peers and their relationships up and down and across the organization. They were easier to work with, or not even that, using me personally, I became a better business partner, and people started really enjoying working with me, but because I was just more aware. And so we were able to show the cause and effect. I mean, easy things to show on cause and effect is think about sales, right? If you can teach sales strategies, a big one with sales strategies you see is the DISC training or the Myers-Briggs. So salespeople can quickly identify the type of personality the person they're selling to has. They have a higher propensity to sell. So lots and lots of sales trainings will measure, how Amber salesperson, was able to measure or sell a widget before the training, and then after the training when she put it into place, if she was able to sell, and then the cohort study. So cause and effect is really important. Next is no rewards tied to training. And I will tell you, I have not worked for an organization where rewards were tied to training. And I find this so like no-brainer. So if we're not telling people, if you take these trainings and you embrace these behavior changes or these business changes or whatever it is, and we can either reduce lawsuits or increase sales or whatever, there's going to be a reward tied to it, directly tied to it. Why don't we do that? I mean, I think we do it in a roundabout way, right? If you do these trainings and you sell more, then we meet the company EBITDA or the company EPS goals, and then we all get bonuses. But if we put more emphasis in training on this, it would be huge. Probably 5 years ago, I, for the first time, saw healthcare on a goal for executives. So the executives taking the initiative of, keeping healthcare claims and costs at a certain percentage growth, because medical care is going to always go up year over year, just like the cost of milk. And the first year it was on our executive goals, we saw a decrease of 20% of tobacco use, because all of a sudden the tobacco programs we were promoting started getting used. We saw an increase of 5% of our obese associates go down, morbidly obese associates change down to obese. So they were doing some of the things their doctors wanted, the drugs they told them to go on or whatnot. And the only change that year was putting the goal of healthcare increases on the goals for the executives to get paid. So I think it's important. I think it needs to be explored more. The next is the team is too isolated. So this is where one of two things, right? It doesn't sit in HR, or it sits in HR, but it's like its own little facet in HR, and it's just pushing out trainings like robotic, and it's not tied into the business. In any perfect HR organization, HR works as a pod. You support a part of the business, the recruiter, the HR business partner, associate relations person, trainer, all of the folks who actually hit the business work together. And then your subject matter expert supports benefits, compensation, and so forth, partner with each of those pods. In a perfect world, that's what you do. Throw in a payroll in that pod, and all those people are working together. So the HR business partner can tell the trainers, here's some things that we're seeing in the business, and the recruiters can tell the HR business partners, here's what we're seeing changing in the business, and then the business partners can tell the recruiters, hey, so-and-so is going to be quitting, I think, or promoting, or they work together. That is an amazing, effective model. And even if you're not large enough to have that type of model, or if you're large like us and a fragmented model, getting to that model at any scale will only bring value, in my opinion, and in many org development opinions, to light. So it's something to think about. And I think the last thing you hear managers say is there's no follow-up, right? Once the training happens, how many of us have gone to a training? I mean, I know I teach at a lot of conferences and so forth, and I attend a lot, and I come back and I'm just so jazzed, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to do this. This is so awesome. And I do it for a few weeks, but nobody else has done it, so I don't have anyone else to talk about, because, maybe the culture isn't one of like train the trainer, teach what you've learned, and then then it just goes by the wayside. And that's all too common. So something I try to do in my organization, within my team, my microcosm team, and I'm not perfect at it. I should do a better job. Maybe after today I'll refresh my brain of doing it, is when one of my team members goes to a training, I ask them to go and train the rest. Like, what did you learn? Tell us what you learned. So those are what managers say about training. So we have to combat all those things. And every single one of those, you guys, can be combated by some type of process that can have a metric. And it doesn't have to be a huge 5-attribute metric every single time, but a metric towards it. So how do you know where your team is? So where is your team? And there's a big assessment checklist. And I have gone through this checklist, I don't know, a gazillion times in my career. And these are the 6 things I think are the most important on that whole list. I think that list had something like, 20 or 30 things on it. So these are my 6 in no particular order. The first is training is requested. If you are an organization where people ask you to train, you are a step above the rest. You're a cut above. You want people to ask you to train, because that means that they have faith in what you do and they believe in what you do, you deliver. So are trainings being requested from you? The bottom 30% of your associates are the ones who suggest new ideas. Why that's important is because your trainings have created an atmosphere and a culture that even your lowest performing people, which could be high performing depending on yours, are still like, man, here's a new idea. Here's what I think we do, because you're fostering an environment of continuous improvement and development. Your employees are involved in training ideas. So it's not just managers coming to you, but the employees. The employees are saying, hey, do you know that I went to this conference and we did XYZ, and I really think that we should do that? Or, hey, I was selling over at Dr. So-and-so's office, and this other pharmaceutical rep came in and they were doing X. Can you find out more about this? That's huge. Employees are continuous self-learners. So think of me, right? And think of you. All of you are in this class. I'm in this class. I like to go to trainings. My company doesn't pay for all of them. And I do them because I really love this field. I love my job. I love my field. I love everything about it. And it's always changing, and it's kind of a crazy hot mess always. And all companies are different. I love, love, love knowing what all companies do, good or bad or ugly. And I think the other thing about continuous self-learners is that means that they're self-driven and they're self-motivated and they have an inner sense of change. And so that then brings itself to the workforce. The way you can measure that is ask your associates how much money in training that you might put away, like for tuition reimbursement or conferences, is actually being used. Those are kind of good points to tell you, what's what. Systems and tools create a learn fast approach. So this again goes back to technology. Do you have really cool online training? We have so many resources out there for training. It does cost money. So this is where you have to show your value, and things like the quote non-value add ones, that we all know are important. Those are ones to really think about. Can you get them online? Can you make it in a more interactive way, but that it's not taking people out of the office? It could be done in sections or chunks or whatever. I mean, be creative. Because then that goes into the last one, which is 75% of training is self-service. This is a big, big one. As the world is changing, the thought process of everyone coming together for a big training is going to be obsolete. In a global atmosphere, in a remote atmosphere, in a multi-state or multi-jurisdiction, it's just not possible. Sometimes, and I always think there's value to in person. But I think of this class and this CERT class, right? Like, I really hope you feel that you're getting the value being online that you would in the class. And there's a give and take to all of it. But my give, I think, is we learn a ton more. The take is sometimes that human connection. But what I hope is throughout your classes, you've learned about things like SHRM and PIRA and OCABA, and you start joining those networks, and that you meet each other, and that you talk with each other, you go onto LinkedIn with each other, you create your own cohorts, because all of you are in this profession. So that means that you all can share best practices. So the skills and the knowledge and the abilities that we have to train, right, those SKAs, they should link to your org strategy. And we need to think of new ways, and we constantly need to be reinventing ourselves and going back to the very first chapter, the peanut butter approach spread of all training the same way to all people, out the door. So we're seeing, like, week 3, another kind of same type of thought process. No peanut butter approach spread, making sure that we have metrics. You're not going to be able to do all things. You're going to want to make sure that you have your internal metrics and your external metrics, right? He talks a lot about that in this group, in this section, like the internal metrics being things for you and your team. And those things are like, how can I get more budget, right? Because we want more budget. So how can I get more budget? And that's where you're going to want to measure what kind of trainings have I done, how much have they cost, what kind of impact have I shown. You want to make sure that you're showing where you've cut or you've lifted and shifted, and you've spread those resources, and you've been flexible with those resources depending on the environment, right? So if one part of your business is not delivering as much profit, and it's something that you really know that needs to be focused on, you found trainings and so forth to help with that. And then there's the external, the business impacts. You really want to identify and determine what skills people need to be successful. So if you know in sales, they have to have sales skills to be successful, that you're really focusing on having good sales training, and you're not having training on how to make a widget if you're not making widgets. And that sounds funny, but it happens. It happens all the time. We don't focus on the right things because we don't ask our business partner. Remember, we have to ask our business partner. So that's what's incredibly important. We want to demonstrate the impact our training has on retention. This, you guys, is the customer service 5th soft metric. This is why are people leaving? Is training one of the reasons? Lack of. How many people are using, as I said earlier, your continuous education budgets or your going to conference budgets, those types of things? Do you know the conferences or the groups or the kind of clubs or organizations that the people in your organization should be aligned with? So like for me, I know all the HR ones, but believe me, I also know the marketing ones, the sales ones, the grocery ones. That's important. So if you don't know that, you need to go look those up so you know what is important in your business for your client who is the associate, so that you can talk their talk and you can be, one step ahead. So just really think about the metrics that you're measuring. As I said, it is important for you to measure metrics that are things like how many trainings have we done, um, how long does it take someone to do those trainings, what did they say about the trainings, what do the managers feel about the trainings, and then as you evolve, how much money was delivered because of the training or saved because of the training or lawsuits reduced because of the training, because then you're starting to show your worth. And then you can evolve those and evolve those and evolve those to really create your 5-point, attribute metric. All right, so let's talk about training metrics. So we talked a little about the business external metrics. So what's the impact of increasing productivity? So externally, when you start to do trainings, you want to show what the impact is. So if you start small and you just start on the ones that are required by law, I want you to measure, time over time, like 1 year over the next year or quarter over quarter. Maybe you have a reduced case of associates complaining about managers, or a reduction in sexual harassment cases, or ADA claims, or lawsuits, whatever, right? You can measure that. You can also measure, just start measuring with the 5th attribute, how people feel, because emotion, you guys, does well. Look at politics. The best presidents, the best congressmen, the best all of them, they're emotionally driven. They can say things that are just so passionate, right? I could say, we must care about voting. It is the most important thing in the American dream, and our forefathers have died, and blah, blah, blah. Or I could say, we must vote, right? The way you say that, the passion you have behind it, that emotion's important. So that 5th attribute and how people feel is important. So just know that if you're able to start there, you're starting somewhere. And I think that's important for training. I'd also start measuring right away if anyone is leaving and they're saying it's because lack of being trained. That's a big one. That's the impact of retention. And then you need to know the SK. So what are the skills? What are the, attributes and all of the different knowledge that your group needs, and just focus on one. Just focus on maybe the most important um, group. Start with finance if you need to, if they're the ones holding the purse strings to get you training budgets. I really do think of, in my organization, I think of some of the technical aspects we need, and people who are developers and people who write algorithm and write code, and what are those skills and those knowledge and attributes that they need so that they can do that, because then I can find trainings on them. Our systems team, right? I have a small part of our systems team. They need to know SQL. So guess what? We all found an Oracle SQL class, and we took it as a team together. So go out and look and understand what your business needs, because then you can talk business and then ask your business leaders, is there any skills or knowledge that might be missing, or a gap, or maybe trends are changing and you want to know what's going on, and you want me to look for those to help train. Maybe it's not you, maybe it's an external training, but you're the one delivering it and you're the one offering it and managing it and so forth. That's a big deal. And then your internal ones, right? These are, how many trainings did you conduct, and what are the success of them, and what % of your budget is spent on it, and what's the benchmarking? What do your competitors do? And then you can say, this is why we should do it. So once you're in, once you've got the in and they buy in on training, you have to know the 5 ways of measuring a training. You might not do this for all, but you definitely want to do this for the key ones, the most expensive ones. So before, like prior to the training happening, you're going to want to know who says they want to be trained versus who shows up. That's a big one. Lots of people say, oh yeah, do that, and then they don't come, or they do come. So I want you to measure that. That's like a first one, right? Measure that. And all of these you will see will fit into the 5 attributes. Next one is satisfaction. Like, how did they like it? And if you can, you do a knowledge test. So for my team, I can do a knowledge test on a lot of things, right? I can pull out key laws, regulations, concepts. I can ask them to build me a SQL code. an HTML code, build me a website. My whole team does all that, from my benefit analysts to my benefit specialists to my comp leave of absence. I make them do all of it, right? Publisher, make all their own communications, all their own trainings. We do it all in-house within our teams at our company. So either they can do it or they can't, right? And then I delayed. I then test my group 6 months later. Can you still do that? Do you the managers, so my managers, when they do a training, I have them ask other managers in the team, are you still getting the same output of what we learned, 6 months ago? And you're going to measure the behaviors. What % of associates or managers continue to change? So when we do manager training on how to motivate and how to coach, or how to talk to your associates, or how to have a difficult conversation. Even my particular managers, when we have these, I look to see if they practice what they preach. How are their one-on-ones going? I never believe in the annual review process. And I mean, the company I work for still does it. But we do a weekly review process. Like every week we should be talking. My managers meet with me one-on-one every week. My second direct reports, so the people who don't report directly to me but one down, meet with me once a month. And then the people that are 3 or 4 rings down meet with me once a quarter. And that's me. And so I expect the same level of time and attention, because I think we always need to be constant feedback, and it's a reciprocal piece, right? I'm telling them what I see, and I'm asking them what they feel, and then I'm in return saying, come to this meeting with a couple things I can do better, and it's a safe environment, but we see if people are doing it. So I can tell if we're practicing what we're preaching. And that goes with any training that you do, right? So I want you to say, all right, what is the behavior that we're wanting to train? And, maybe they're just the initial HR training, how to do a write-up, how to do a coaching, how to do an investigation, whatever those are, right? The ones that we have to do, because you get that foot in the door because you have to do those ones, and measure and see. And if it's not changing the behavior, then, go back and have a new conversation. And then the last one's performance. What % of the associates or managers who saw the behavior change are now seeing a performance change? Increase in sales, decrease in lawsuits, increase of happiness of associates that report to that manager, and so forth. So I think those are the beginning basic ones. As I mentioned, a member of our class found a great little metric sheet that I'm going to post, and you can see some more that are on there. You can Google a lot of them. I just don't want anyone, a few of you have also emailed me like, oh my gosh, I Googled it, so overwhelming, I don't know how I'm going to do all those. You're not going to, and I don't want you to. Remember, the goal for me in this class is for you to continue to write metrics. As I was reading many of your guys' week to put it together and just the answer questions, I was thoroughly impressed, because I didn't ask in one of them to create metrics for the questions I asked, but more conceptually, what do you think, how do you feel, what the author said, but more than half of you created metrics in them, and it was impressive, because that's what I want, right? I want you to start creating metrics, either numbers, and then evolve them into your 5-point attributes, or evolve them into what is it, why are you doing it, right? The biggest thing is, why are you doing it? Maybe you're doing it internally so you can get a grip on what kind of work you're doing to show your value of ask. Maybe you're doing it because you want to change your behavior. Maybe you're doing it because you want to ask money, but think about that. So your CFO is never going to ask you for metrics unless there's a reason behind it. So if you're going to show metrics, just really think about it as we go through the next, 4 weeks or so. Why am I doing these metrics? What do I want to get out of these metrics? If you don't have an organization that you can do them on right now, think of an organization or a utopia. If you were in HR, you make it up. Pretend your organization is doing it, or if you could make them do it. That's the whole importance of this entire class. In 7 weeks, you're not going to be an expert. In 7 weeks, you're not going to know it all, but in 7 weeks, gosh darn it, you are going to be way better than anyone that walks into that room that hasn't done this course or who hasn't been in HR for 20 years. And I think that's the biggest important part as you're looking at all your different metrics. So with that, I will go on to our next slide and our final thoughts. All right, my final thoughts for the week. I truly could talk about rewards and recognition until it's blue in the face. In fact, I could teach a whole class on it for 7 weeks. I love it so much. So as you're, Googling and looking for things and reading what your classmates are talking about, make sure that you guys continue to do the deep discussions and really challenging each other on your thoughts and your metrics. Make sure that you are continuing to give really good examples that you're doing. And if you have any questions, you know how to reach me. You can either email me or you can call me. You guys have my phone number, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. I try to go on every single day, a couple times a day. So with that, I hope you guys have a wonderful week. And for any of you who have kids, I think we're like a couple weeks away from school getting started. So enjoy the next few weeks of your summer.